What up, it's Brandon here and welcome to the Create Original CRS frame follow-up review. In this video I'll be telling you how the frames last, as well as a few other things I've noticed that have kind of changed my opinion on them a little bit. But anyway, in the original review I said that I didn't get the chance to try out any of the other hardness or suspension, mainly because I was really put off by how hard they were to set up in the first place. But eventually I felt the need to just clean my bearings. I was like, why not? Two birds with one stone, and it actually wasn't too bad to change around. Definitely not as easy as it is on any other frame I've had, but it didn't take a whole day like it did the first time. And if you don't know, when I brought the frames, they came with a rigid suspension setup, which has no suspension at all. It's just like a normal frame. It has a soft suspension, which is soft, and then a medium, and then a hard. And when I first set it up, I only put the soft ones in, hoping that I'd really notice the suspension the most. So to see if I actually do notice it, first thing I did was put the rigid spacers in so that my frames had absolutely no suspension. This was greatly inspired by an article I read saying how someone who got like an early version of the frames swapped back to normal frames and said it was quite a hard change to adjust back. And just from my experience skating them with the soft one, I felt like I didn't notice any difference at all, so I was intrigued. But despite my original thoughts, after one day at the park with this no suspension setup in the frame, I did notice the difference. If you don't know the skates I'm skating at the moment, they do have this problem where in the heel, where you screw the frame on, it's actually dented in a bit right in the heel, and this can cause quite a lot of heel pain. Back to Blading has a good fix for it. I'll link the video up here so you can, if you want to know how to fix it. But anyway, I hadn't noticed that problem at all yet, but as soon as I changed to this rigid setup on the frame, I definitely noticed it. After just jumping over like transition or something or doing an air, my heels hurt, and by the end of the day I didn't want to walk. I was very sore, and there was nothing like, my heels weren't bruised or anything, they were just sore. Just from that experience there, I have to say the suspension definitely does something, and I think it is a very good replacement for boots that don't have built-in suspension in the heel, because the skates I had before this was the Razor SL and the Razor Shift, and they have a giant shock absorber in the heel, and having the suspension frames and a skate like them that doesn't have the built-in shock absorber seemed to be a good replacement, because I didn't notice. It was definitely softening my landings enough for it to save me from the horrible heel of these skates. So I can definitely say the suspension frame works, and it works pretty well. Like I said in the original one, it's a subtle change, which is good, so it's a quick adjust, but it works. So if you're looking to keep a skate like the them skate or the M12 or something that doesn't have a shock absorber built into it, so we want to keep it flat-footed, not like a raised heel, the suspension frames is a really good solution to that. But another thing I noticed is it really worsened the biggest problem with these frames, which is the loose bolts. So in my last video I said how all the bolts seem to be just like a millimeter too big for the frames, and that made the skate very clacky just to walk around. And when I was putting these new spacers on, I noticed that when I put the bolt through the wheel, that there's way too much of the bolt sticking out the other side. And this made absolutely no sense to me at the time, because I compare the size of the metal spacer to the Euroframe spacer. It's the exact same size. So where's this extra like 2 millimeters of metal coming from? It doesn't make any sense. Here's a clip of me just after I set them up. I changed the suspension on my frames to the just metal ones that don't have any suspension at all, to see if that would fix the clacking sound. And oh my god, I was wrong. It is like 20 times worse now. Look at this. It's like the worst thing I've ever heard. Every single bolt is like over a millimeter too long. It's really, really weird. I don't understand. So the problem is the bolts. They all move. Even though they're as tight as they can get, they all move a lot. I have to skate these today because I didn't have time to change back to the other ones. I don't even think the other ones will be any different. It's weird. It's like somewhere between now and when I had the old bits, the bolts have gotten longer or smaller. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. So you can see that's absolutely horrible. It's the worst feeling frame I ever had at that stage. The metal on metal, it's such a horrible clacky sound. And the bolt holding the wheel itself can move like every direction at least a millimeter, Just there's something so wrong with that. It really doesn't make any sense. Since it was such a bad feeling, I wanted to change it straight away. So as soon as I got home, I swapped them back into a different setup with the suspension, trying out the other two suspensions. And just then, even then, setting it up, I had this weird thing where every so often one of the bolts would be the exact right length, even though before, on every other time I set it up, even with the original setup, they were all like a millimeter too big. And like nothing had changed, the same wheels, and it makes no sense because all the spacers should be the same size. I have no idea where this extra millimeter is coming from to fill up the gap there. It just makes zero sense. It's just weird. And this has definitely got to be the worst part about these frames, the biggest downfall. But I did come up with a quick fix for them, and that was to get some plumbing tape and wrap it around the smaller bolt, tighten it in, and it stopped the movement. This is a very short fix because I have to redo it almost every other week as the tape gets loose and falls off. You can probably do it with a washer if you find one the same size as the bolt. Otherwise you're going to be scraping on it, or it's going to be stopping the suspension, which is kind of pointless. I also tried using a different bolt from another frame, but all the other frame bolts ever are way too small for these frames. They're a lot wider. So when I put I had a GC frame bolt, I put it in and like it worked and it stopped the clackiness, but the bolt did not screw in enough. It'd be a serious weak point in the bolt and it'd probably snap. At the end of the day, this is super disappointing because you shouldn't have to do any of the stuff with a frame that costs this much money. You shouldn't have to buy these frames knowing you're going to have to do one of these fixes. They should just come how they're made. I don't know how this error happened. It seems like a hard one to track down what the problem is, so I kind of understand, but it's not good enough, end of the day. Even with the horrible story that comes behind these frames, they shouldn't have been released like this. But anyway, after I fixed the clacky problem, I could now totally just focus on the main feature of the frame, which is the suspension. So I tried a new setup. I really wanted to trial riding 2 different hardness of suspension in the frame. So what I did is I put a medium soft suspension on the toe and the heel, and then put a hard one in the middle, but I rocketed the middle one up. And this is where I found probably the best way to ride these frames. So in my head, this was still going to be a flat setup because the soft suspension on the toes would cause all the wheels to hit the ground when I land or when I push to jump. Meaning I should hopefully have the benefit of skating flat where you have more movement in your feet, but I'd also have the benefit of skating like anti-rocker because the middle wheels are raised up so they're not going to wheel bite. This didn't happen like that. The suspension is not that soft, so what I found was the middle wheels only ever touch the ground if I was going over a crack or something, like an anti-rocker would. But I do think this is the best way to ride these frames. If you're looking for a anti-rocker skate that you can use a regular size wheels as anti-rocker wheels, this is the one for you. The wheel bite protection on the frame is perfect on a wheel rocket in. It's super good. And that way your wheels are always going to be spinning. Your anti-rocker is never going to get out of shape because of their normal wheels. For me anyway, that's the ideal situation for an anti-rocker setup. But I don't want to be skating anti-rocker. The whole reason I got these frames was because I wanted to skate flat. I figured since there's like no wheel bite when the wheels are rocket up, why don't I rocker all the wheels up? And I tried that and it did not work. These frames are definitely not designed to ride like that. I don't really know why that's even an option on the outside wheels. And the frames were like, maybe like 5 millimeters of touching the ground, so every slight turn, they'll just slide out. So it's not rideable like that. But grinds were still really good, so I was right in some ways. So I ended up settling on this middle ground, which I've got set up right here, where it's not called tri-rocker, that's what I want to call it, but I'm riding on 3 wheels. The front wheel and the back 2 wheels are rocketed down, but this middle wheel here in the front is rocketed up. Still feels flat in the fact that I've still got 3 wheels on the ground, so I can pivot a lot quicker than I normally could, but I don't get wheel bite every time I try to do a Royale or a back torque or something. So definitely not, it's the ideal setup on these frames for me, but it's not the ideal setup that I want in general. Definitely gonna be looking for something completely different in my next frame. Something better for flat. This is definitely not a good flat frame. Anyway though, moving on to how these frames last and their durability. I'm pretty impressed. All the hardware has, despite being the wrong size for the frame, and it's all held up very well. None of the bolts are rounded. They have a little bit of a rusted look to them, but they're totally fine. The frame itself, I've definitely got a bit of a groove in it, but it's got a lot of life left. There's still an H-block there, especially after 3 months of skating. Usually my skates lose an H-block, so this is pretty impressive. I've been doing a decent amount of C-slides in them as well, and they're still doing really good. I might start hitting the bolt on the toe here now, and the heel, but it seems to be like the perfect angle for doing C-slides, so I think we should be alright. And I can always rotate these frames. I'd say these frames definitely could last easily, especially if I rotate them another like 6 months. So very good durability. So now, just as my final thoughts on the CRS frames, I really think this is a brilliant idea, definitely the best suspension frame made to date. And they work, they do work. The suspension works, and it's a really good trade-off for not having a built-in shock absorber in the skate. And once you do some little fixes, they do feel pretty good. And they definitely would be a really good anti-rocker frame, really good anti-rocker setup, just for the wheel bite and the rockering you can do. But still, the biggest downfall for these frames has got to be the bolts and the clackiness, which is pretty sad because it's so close to being such a good frame. And honestly, if the bolts were the right size for it, this would be a completely different story. I'd probably definitely say these are worth the money, but at this stage, I definitely say that I do not recommend these frames and they are not worth the money. So do not get them, they're not worth it. But in case you do want to get them, they will be linked in the description. But yeah, I don't recommend it. Anyway, that's it for this follow-up review. I hope you got some better insight. I apologize for the first video because it was way too long. Oh my gosh. I rewatched it to get some more ideas for this video, and wow, that video is terrible. I apologize. But anyway, thanks so much for watching, guys. Huge shout out to my Patreons, Deb, Dennis, and Jason. And I'll see you guys on Wednesday. Peace out.